Victor Langford slammed his whiskey glass down on the bar and pointed across the ballroom. $1 million, he announced, loud enough for 500 people to hear, to whoever walks over there and kisses Isabella Hayes, right now, in front of everyone. The room went dead silent. 500 people, zero movement. Because everyone in that ballroom knew one thing about Isabella Hayes: you didn't touch her. You didn't reach her. You didn't even try. Then a man in a catering uniform set down his tray and started walking. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You will not want to miss what happens next. She slapped the contract onto the table so hard the water glasses shook. Read line 47, Isabella said. Her voice didn't rise. It never rose. Out loud. So everyone in this room hears exactly what you tried to sneak past me. The attorney across the table, 40 years old. Ivy League corner office, went the color of copy paper. Ms. Hayes, I assure you that clause was standard boiler. Out loud. She didn't blink. Or I call Morrison at Blackridge before I reach the elevator, and you explain to your client why his refinancing collapsed because his own lawyer got caught being sloppy. Your choice. You have 10 seconds. The man read the clause. Out loud. In front of everyone. When he finished, Isabella picked up her pen, crossed the line out, initialed the margin, and slid the document back across the table. Now we can continue, she said. That was Tuesday morning. By Saturday night, that same woman, the most controlled, most guarded, most deliberately unreachable person in American finance, would be kissed in front of 500 people by a man she had never met. And she would let him. Isabella Hayes was 34 years old and had not been touched by anyone in any way that mattered in 4 years. Not because she wasn't wanted. Because she had made a decision, clean, surgical, final, that the cost of wanting was too high, and she was no longer willing to pay it. She had learned that lesson at 29, courtesy of a man named Daniel Rourke, who had green eyes and a laugh that made rooms warmer, and who had spent 14 months telling her she was the only person who had ever truly understood him. He had also spent those same 14 months feeding proprietary deal intelligence to a competitor. Pillow talk converted to leverage. Trust quietly monetized. She had been so certain of him. That was the part she couldn't forgive herself for. Not the betrayal she understood betrayal, it was simply a category of human behavior, but the certainty. The absolute embarrassing certainty that she had read him right. She had cried once, in the shower running the water hot enough that there was nothing but steam and the sound of it, and she had let herself have exactly that much before she turned the water off, dried her face, and decided she was done. Done with the guessing. Done with the cost-benefit analysis of intimacy that always seemed to come out wrong. Done with handing people the specific, precise information they needed to hurt her and being shocked when they used it. She walked into the office the next morning and started making calls. By the time Daniel realized what was happening, his career was already over. She hadn't been cruel about it. She had simply been accurate. And after that, she built the wall higher. Not out of bitterness. Bitterness was a waste of processing power, but out of a clear-eyed recognition that she was better at this, at all of it, when she wasn't managing the noise of other people's access to her interior life. It worked. God, it worked. 5 years of the cleanest, most efficient, most successful run of her career. Board confidence. Investor returns that made people say her name in rooms she wasn't in tones that blended respect and fear in equal measure. Isabella Hayes was untouchable. She had made herself that way on purpose. She just hadn't anticipated how permanent it would feel. Claire knocked twice before opening the door. Always twice. Isabella had trained her without ever saying a word about it, simply by not responding the first time every time until the behavior corrected itself. Whitmore's team called. He's pushing the 8:15 to 9. Isabella didn't look up from the Meridian event brief on her desk. Whitmore pushed, or his team pushed. His team. Then tell his team that if Whitmore isn't physically in this building by 8:40, I pull the offer and open conversations with Hargrove Capital before lunch. I know exactly what it'll do. She turned a page. That's why I said it. The door closed. Whitmore arrived at 8:37. He signed at 8:52. Isabella was back at her desk by 9, across the city, in a commercial kitchen that smelled like industrial cleaner and reheated stock. Marcus Johnson was tying his apron for the third time that week and having a conversation with himself that he was getting tired of having. This is temporary. He'd been saying it for 11 months. He retied the knot tighter and told himself it still felt true. Marcus was 38, 6'2", built like a man who had spent his 20s doing things that required physical effort, and his 30s doing things that required precision, and his hands showed both. There was a scar across his left knuckle from a piece of server rack hardware in a Denver data center back, when he had a data center to maintain, and a team of 19 people who reported to him, and a title that had taken 8 years to earn, Senior Director of Infrastructure Pinnacle Systems. Past tense. 3 years ago, Pinnacle had been acquired. The acquisition had been handled by Hayes Capital. Clean paperwork, strong return for the shareholders, executed efficiently. 412 jobs had ended as a consequence. His had been one of them. He understood it technically. He understood how acquisitions worked. He'd sat in enough boardrooms to understand that the spreadsheet that ended his career had looked from the other side of the table like a column of numbers resolving correctly. He just also knew what it had looked like from his side. The email, the HR language, the severance package that looked reasonable until you set it against a mortgage and 12 years of professional relationships that had gone cold overnight because nobody wanted to be visibly associated with the people that Hayes Capital had decided weren't worth keeping. He hadn't gotten bitter. He told himself that on the train to Midtown in the uniform with someone else's name on the tag, they still hadn't ordered one for him, watching the city through the window and reminding himself that he had gotten through the worst of it and was still standing, which was more than some men managed. He still had his mind, his discipline, his reputation intact among the people who had actually worked with him. Temporary. He straightened his collar in the reflection of the catering van window as it pulled up to the Meridian Hotel's service entrance, and he followed the line of servers inside. The Whitmore Investment Gala occupied the Meridian's grand ballroom, a room designed to make people feel wealthy by proximity, which Marcus noted dryly was doing exactly that tonight. He'd been in rooms like this before as a guest. He let that thought arrive and move through him without stopping. The way he'd learned to let all the comparison thoughts move you, gave them a moment you didn't fight them, and then you kept walking. Johnson. Dale the supervisor handed him a loaded champagne tray without looking up from his clipboard. East Wing, move and smile. Copy that. He moved. He didn't particularly smile. He noticed Isabella Hayes 40 minutes in, and not for the reason most men would have noticed her first. She was beautiful. Yes, but that registered almost secondarily the way you register the weather when you've already clocked something more important about the terrain. What Marcus noticed was how she stood. The room was full of people performing connection, leaning into each other, laughing at the right moments, angling their bodies toward whoever held the most influence. It was a kind of social choreography that Marcus had once participated in fluently, and now watched from the outside with the clarity of someone who no longer had skin in the game. Isabella Hayes wasn't performing anything. She stood in the center of a cluster of 3 men who were clearly competing for her attention, 2 of them checking their reflections in their champagne glasses. The third talking with his hands, and she was looking at the middle distance. Not rudely, not dramatically. Just elsewhere. The way someone looks when they have trained themselves to be emotionally absent from rooms that don't deserve their presence. Marcus recognized it the way you recognize something you've seen in the mirror. He moved to the next table, refilled 2 glasses, and didn't let himself look back. Victor Langford arrived at 9:15, and the room adjusted toward him, the way rooms adjust toward money, Not enthusiastically, but automatically the way a compass adjusts to north, regardless of whether north deserves the deference. Marcus had refilled the man's glass twice by 9:40, the second time. Langford hadn't acknowledged him. Not rudely, with the specific casual non-awareness of a man who had never once in his life been required to see the person handing him something. Marcus watched him work the room. The shoulder gripping. The loud laughing. The way his eyes kept tracking across the ballroom, returning again and again to the one person who wasn't tracking back. Isabella Hayes still hadn't looked at Langford once, not deliberately. She wasn't performing the ignoring, she genuinely didn't notice him, which Marcus could see from his position near the east wall, was the thing that was making Victor Langford's jaw tighten incrementally with every pass. Some men cannot endure being invisible to the person they've decided should see them. Most of those men eventually do something about it. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice was raised high enough and confident enough that the room's noise dropped on instinct. The Pavlovian response to a wealthy man calling for attention. Langford stood near the bar, glass in hand, silver hair catching the light like he'd arranged it to. I have a proposition. Marcus went still near the east wall. $1 million. Langford let the number sit. He was enjoying this. Wire transfer tonight before midnight to anyone with the nerve to walk over to Isabella Hayes and kiss her. Right now. In front of everyone. The silence was total. Then the nervous laughter started. The release valve kind. The kind a crowd produces when someone has crossed a line so openly that the only social tool available is laughter. Marcus didn't laugh. He looked at Isabella. She hadn't moved. Her face hadn't changed. She was still holding her champagne glass with both hands, and that detail which he had registered earlier without analyzing now landed with sudden clarity. That was the tell. Everything else about her was composed, engineered. The posture, the expression, the careful distance in her eyes. But the hands. Both hands. Wrapped around that glass like it was the one physical thing in the room she was allowing herself to hold on to. Marcus looked around the ballroom. Nobody moved toward her. Several men glanced in her direction and then away. Smiling. Calculating. Deciding that whatever the upside, the risk of walking toward Isabella Hayes in front of this crowd wasn't worth it. He looked back at her. He thought about a woman who had built a wall so high and so solid that 500 people in the same room as her couldn't reach her. He thought about standing at a train window in someone else's name tag and telling himself temporary for the 300-and-something day in a row. He thought about what it costs a person to go unseen for long enough. He set his tray down on the table. Carefully, no sound. And he walked. He heard the murmur build behind him like a wave. The crowd processing the fact that someone was actually moving, and then processing who was moving, and then landing somewhere between disbelief and a held breath. Marcus didn't rush, didn't slow down, didn't perform anything. He crossed the floor of the Meridian Ballroom in the same way he had crossed data center floors at 2 in the morning when a system was down and the timeline was bad. Focused, deliberate, already past the question of whether this was a good idea. He stopped in front of Isabella Hayes. Up close, the composure was architectural. She had built it the way you build something you intend to last, layered, reinforced, load-bearing. Her eyes were dark and steady, and defended in a way that Marcus recognized immediately as the product of a specific kind of wound, the kind that doesn't heal wrong, it heals armored. She was searching his face. Fast, precise, looking for the joke, the cruelty, the angle, looking for the thing he wanted. He held her gaze and didn't move. "I'm not doing this for him," he said, quietly. "Just her." She didn't step back. Whatever she found or didn't find in his face made her go very still. He kissed her. Not performance, not theater, not the aggressive collision of someone collecting a dare. 4 seconds of "I see you, and I'm not afraid of what I see." When he stepped back, the ballroom was a held breath. Langford broke first. "Beautiful." He spread his arms wide, laughing, turning to the crowd like a man taking a curtain call for a play he'd written. I love it. I truly love it. But come on, folks. Obviously, it was a joke. Did anyone honestly think? He gestured toward Marcus with his glass, the gesture containing everything it needed to, that I was wiring $1 million to the help. The crowd laughed. Enough of them. The specific grateful laughter of 500 people who'd been holding tension and needed a place to put it down. Marcus turned toward the service corridor. He had taken exactly one step when Isabella's voice stopped the room. Mr. Langford. 2 words. Flat. Certain. The vocal equivalent of a hand placed on a door to stop it closing. The laughter died. Marcus stopped moving, but he didn't turn back, not yet. He just listened to the room go still around him. You made a public commitment, Isabella said. In front of my guests, at my event. Langford's smile was holding, but it had gone structural. Performative. The smile of a man who has just realized the power dynamic shifted and isn't sure when. Isabella, sweetheart, it was. You don't call me that. No heat. No raised voice. Just a wall. And I'm not interested in what it was. I'm interested in what was said. She picked up her phone from the table beside her. The room watched her make the transfer. Watched her lower the phone. Watched her look directly at Marcus. Done, she said simply. Langford's mouth opened, closed. He looked like a man who had handed someone a novelty check and watched them cash it. The room was noise again, overlapping voices, the buzz of 500 people processing something they hadn't expected. Marcus stood inside all of it and looked at Isabella Hayes. She was looking back at him. Not with gratitude, not with warmth yet, that wasn't available to her. Not here, not tonight. But with something real beneath the composure. The specific look of a person standing at the edge of an equation they don't know how to solve. He could have left clean. Should have, probably. Instead, he said it. The thing that had been true since the moment he watched her standing alone in the geometric center of 500 people. You aren't cold. He kept his voice low just for her. You're lonely. He didn't wait. He turned, moved through the parting crowd, hit the service door, and was gone. Isabella Hayes stood in the middle of the Meridian Ballroom. She counted. She had learned years ago that when something threatened to undo her in public, you imposed numbers on it. Mathematics against chaos. You counted until you had somewhere to stand. She got to 12. Then she set down her champagne glass, said something brief and appropriate to the nearest cluster of guests, and left the gala with the same expression she wore leaving any other meeting. She got into her car. She gave her driver the address. She watched the city move past the window. And she did not let herself feel anything until the car turned onto her block and the distance was wide enough to contain it. Then she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and held it there. Not because of the kiss. Because of "you're lonely," said without cruelty, without flattery, without any of the angles she'd spent 5 years training herself to detect. Said the way you say something when you simply know it and aren't afraid of the knowing. Her phone lit up on the seat. Claire Wire confirmed. Should I file anything on my end? Isabella stared at the screen for a long moment. Then typed, find out who he is. Everything. She put the phone down face first. Outside Manhattan ran its cold, indifferent machinery, and inside the car, the most carefully constructed woman in American finance sat with something cracking open behind her sternum. Quiet, structural, like the sound a wall makes when the foundation beneath it shifts. She didn't sleep. Not because of the kiss. Because of 4 words that had landed somewhere below all her defenses before she had time to raise them. She lay in the dark and thought about what it meant that a stranger in a borrowed uniform had seen her more accurately in 4 minutes than anyone in her life had managed in 4 years. She thought about what it cost. The wall, the precision, the safety of being unreachable. She had never let herself add up that particular column before. Tonight in the dark alone with a ceiling she knew too well, she did the math. And she didn't like the total. Across the city, Marcus Johnson sat at his kitchen table with his phone face up beside his coffee cup looking at a bank notification that had arrived like a lightning strike in an ordinary life. He should have felt relief. Pure, clean, uncomplicated relief. He felt something with too many variables for that. He thought about dark eyes that had searched his face with the speed and precision of a system running a security check, looking for the threat, not finding it, not knowing what to do with the absence. He thought about a woman gripping a champagne glass, like something warm she needed to hold. He thought about the fact that he had recognized her, not who she was, not her name, not the power she carried, but the shape of her. The specific geometry of a person who has decided that being alone is safer than being wrong again. He knew that shape. He'd been living inside it for 11 months. He set the phone down. Outside the city ran its engines through the dark. Temporary, he thought, but tonight, for the first time in almost a year, it wasn't the job he was thinking about. The next morning, Claire put a file on Isabella's desk. It was thicker than Isabella expected. She opened the first page and stopped. Because the name of the company listed under Marcus Johnson's last corporate position, the company whose elimination had ended his career and the careers of 411 other people, was Pinnacle Systems. Acquired by Hayes Capital 3 years ago. Authorized by Isabella Hayes, CEO. She sat very still. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of something she had only ever seen as a number in a column. It had a name. It had a face. And it had walked across a silent room last night and seen her more clearly than she had ever allowed anyone to. The file was 11 pages long. Isabella didn't read it the way she read acquisition briefs, skimming for the numbers, flagging the leverage points, moving fast. She read it the way she read things when she was afraid of what came next. Slowly. Every line. Marcus Darnell Johnson. Born 1987, Detroit, Michigan. Computer Science, University of Michigan. Graduated top of his class. 8 years at Pinnacle Systems, starting as a junior infrastructure analyst and ending as senior director. A climb that his former colleagues, 3 of whom Claire had apparently called directly, described in terms that made Isabella pause more than once. "I was the kind of leader you'd walk through a wall for," one of them had said. Claire had written it in quotes, which she rarely did. "He built that department from 11 people to 19. He knew every system we had down to the line of code. And when the acquisition came, when Hayes came, he was the one who stayed calm. He told us it was going to be okay. He was still telling us that the morning the termination emails went out." Isabella set that page down. She picked it up again. She set it down a second time. The severance Hayes Capital had. Pinnacle's eliminated staff had been standard. 8 weeks plus 1 per year of service, consistent with industry practice, legally clean, financially reasonable from any angle a board would use to evaluate it. She had signed off on it in a stack of 47 documents related to the acquisition. She remembered the stack. She did not remember that specific line. She remembered the return on the deal, 14% above projection. Her CFO had called it one of the cleanest integrations they'd managed in 5 years. She put the file flat on her desk and pressed both palms against it, and she sat with the specific, unfamiliar discomfort of a person who has always been very good at making decisions and has just been forced to hold one of those decisions up to a light she'd never pointed at it before. 412 people. She had known the number. It had been in the report. Workforce reduction, 412 positions. She had known it the way you know a number in a column, present, accounted for, factored into the cost-benefit analysis, and then filed. Marcus Johnson had not been a number. He had been a man in a borrowed uniform, setting down a tray and walking across a silent room, and now he was sitting in her chest, like something she couldn't put back in a column. She closed the file. Then she opened it again and looked at his last known address. She didn't call him that morning. She almost did twice. got as far as opening her contacts, staring at the number Claire had included at the end of the file, and then putting the phone face down with the particular deliberateness of a woman talking herself off a ledge she didn't want to admit she was standing on. What would she say? I looked you up. I found out what I did to your career. I'm sorry. She tested the shape of that sentence and found it insufficient in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Not wrong exactly, just not built for the weight it would have to carry. She went to work instead. Me? She sat in 4 meetings, made 6 decisions, managed a minor crisis in the London office by phone at 2 in the afternoon, and was precise and effective and completely present for all of it. She was always present. That was the thing about the wall, it wasn't a retreat. She functioned better behind it. She just couldn't stop thinking about the file. Marcus spent the morning after the gala doing what he always did on Sunday mornings, which was making coffee reading through the tech industry newsletters. He'd stayed subscribed to more out of habit than hope, and trying not to perform an emotion about the previous night that he hadn't decided yet was real. He'd been paid. That was real. The number in his bank account was real, and the things it meant were real. 3 months of mortgage cushion, the ability to stop doing the daily math of his checking account, with the focused anxiety of a man diffusing something the space to breathe. He should have felt lighter. He felt like a man who had walked into a story that wasn't finished. His phone had been busy since 6 in the morning. 2 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. A text from Dale, his supervisor, that read, "Call me before you come in Tuesday. We need to talk about last night." 3 notifications from LinkedIn, which he'd checked with the wariness of someone who knows that sudden visibility is rarely uncomplicated. The LinkedIn notifications were connection requests. 2 of them were from people he vaguely recognized from the Meridian's guest list. The third was from a man named Victor Langford, which Marcus stared at for a long moment before declining without drama. He poured more coffee. His phone rang. Unknown number again. Same one as this morning. He answered it. Mr. Johnson. The voice was female professional, moving at the pace of someone who was used to people's full attention. My name is Claire Osei. I'm Chief of Staff to Isabella Hayes. Ms. Hayes would like to schedule a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. Marcus was quiet for a second. A meeting, he repeated. Yes, sir. About what? A brief pause. The kind that means the answer to that is above my pay grade to explain. Ms. Hayes didn't specify. She asked me to extend the invitation and to tell you that she's aware this is an unusual request. Marcus looked at his coffee. He thought about the file he did not know existed on a desk 43 floors above Manhattan with his name on the first page. He thought about dark eyes running a security check on his face in the middle of a ballroom. When? He said. She'd expected him to be cautious. Curt, maybe. She had not expected him to walk into her office on Tuesday afternoon and sit down across from her with the unhurried, self-possessed ease of a man who had decided somewhere between the phone call and this chair that he had nothing to perform. No nerves, no deference, no calculated positioning. He just sat down. Isabella had a system for meetings. She controlled the temperature of a room by controlling the opening. The first 30 seconds she'd learned established every dynamic that followed. She did it without being obvious about it. A specific stillness, a precise delay before speaking. The management of the silence until the other person's discomfort filled it and handed her the advantage. Marcus Johnson sat across from her and waited. He wasn't uncomfortable. I was just waiting. Like a man who had learned through extended experience that most situations resolve themselves if you gave them room. She was the one who broke first. I read your file, she said. I figured. I owe you an explanation. Something moved in his face, not surprise, not agreement. More like a recalibration. An explanation. He said the way you repeat a word when you're testing whether it's the right one for the weight being asked of it. Pinnacle Systems, Isabella said. The acquisition. I signed off on it. I know you did. I didn't. She stopped. Restarted. The workforce reduction was in the report. It was a number. I treated it like a number. 412, Marcus said. Yeah, his voice was even. Not cold. She'd been cold. She knew what cold felt like from the inside. And this wasn't it. This was something steadier. A man who had moved through the grief of it and arrived somewhere that looked like solid ground, and was looking at her now from that ground without cruelty, but also without letting her off anything. I'm not here for an apology, he said. If that's what this is. Then what do you think this is? He looked at her for a moment, direct, unhurried. I think you read a file and found something you weren't expecting, and you're not sure what to do with it. And I think that's probably an unfamiliar feeling for you. Isabella held his gaze. You're not wrong, she said. Something relaxed slightly in his posture, almost imperceptible, but she was someone who made her living reading rooms. Then tell me what you actually want to say. Not the corporate version, the real one. She'd been asked that before. By therapists, by Claire once, by a friend she'd been close with before the friend moved to London, and the friendship became a scheduling problem. She had never found the question easy. She found it harder now because she actually wanted to answer it. I've made a lot of decisions, she said. Good ones by most measures. Clean outcomes. Strong returns. I'm good at it. I've built my career on being good at it. She paused. I don't think about the people on the other side of the columns very often. I know, Marcus said. Not unkindly. I'm thinking about it now. Because of me specifically, or because you got caught? The question was direct enough that it landed like a slap, not aggressive, just precise. The kind of thing you say to someone when you respect them enough not to let them be imprecise with themselves. Isabella didn't look away. Both, she said. I think both. And I think the honest version is that I wouldn't have thought about it at all if you hadn't been the one who walked across that room Saturday night. And I know that says something about me that I'm not entirely comfortable with. Marcus was quiet for a moment. At least you know that, he said. It's not enough. No, he agreed. But it's a start. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Can I tell you something? Please. I didn't walk across that room because of you. I didn't know who you were, not really. I knew the name. I knew the company. I didn't make the connection until later. He paused. I walked across because of him. Because Langford stood in the middle of that room and used you as a prop, and every man in there calculated whether the risk was worth it and decided it wasn't, and I watched you hold that glass with both hands. He stopped. Isabella didn't move, and I've held on to things like that, he said, quieter now. When there's nothing else, you hold on to whatever's warm. And I wasn't going to stand there and watch him do that to you. The room was very quiet. Isabella had built her professional reputation on knowing what to say next. On never being the one without the next sentence. On moving conversations the direction she wanted them to go, with the particular efficiency of someone who treats language as infrastructure. She didn't have a next sentence. What she had sitting in her chest, quiet and inconvenient and real, was something that felt dangerously like gratitude. The kind that goes deeper than the transaction, into the place where you realize someone saw you when you had stopped expecting to be seen. $1 million, she finally said. What about it? It wasn't repayment. She said it carefully, making sure it was precise. I want you to know that. It wasn't me settling a debt I felt I owed you from the acquisition. I don't want you to think. I know what it was, Marcus said. It was you keeping your word, which is more than Langford was willing to do. A pause. Then almost to himself, it's more than most people do. Isabella studied him. What are you doing now? She asked. Work. Catering mostly. Some freelance consulting on the side, but the pipeline's slow. Corporate networks are small in ways that aren't always visible until you're on the outside of them. His voice was even factual. No self-pity in it. I'm building it back up. I'd like to help with that. The offer landed in the room, and she watched him process it. Watched the various responses move across his face in quick succession. The pride, the calculation, the weighing of what accepting meant and what refusing cost. I'm not interested in charity, he said. I know, I'm not offering it. She opened the folder on her desk, a different one thinner, prepared this morning. I have a technology infrastructure review that my internal team has been managing badly for 2 quarters. It's a consulting contract. Real work, real scope, real timeline. I'm offering it because your background is exactly what it requires, and because I'd like it done correctly. She paused. I looked at your Pinnacle work, the infrastructure you built there, the system architecture. It was exceptional. He looked at her. You read the technical files. I read everything in the file. Something crossed his face that she couldn't quite name. Not pleasure exactly. More like the quiet, complicated feeling of being recognized for something you'd stopped expecting anyone to see. Send me the scope, he said. I will. He nodded, started to stand. Mr. Johnson. He paused. Saturday night. She chose the words precisely. What you said before you left. He waited. You were right, Isabella said. I am lonely. She said it the way she said things she had decided to say, completely without hedging. I haven't admitted that to anyone, including myself, for a very long time. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. I could tell. How? Because I've been the same way. He straightened. And lonely people recognize each other. We're just usually too proud to say it out loud. He left. Isabella sat in the quiet of her office and listened to the sound of the door closing, and she thought that was either the most professionally inadvisable conversation she'd had in 5 years or the most honest one. She couldn't decide which. She found that she didn't entirely mind not knowing. The consulting scope arrived in Marcus's inbox at 7 that evening. He read it at the kitchen table with a second cup of coffee, and then he read it again because the first read had made him think he was misreading something. It was a real project, a serious one, not a make-work softener or a pity contract dressed up in technical language. It was a legitimate infrastructure audit and redesign scope for a technology integration that Hayes Capital had inherited through another acquisition, and it was the kind of work that his team at Pinnacle had done at the highest level, and it was the kind of work he genuinely knew how to do. He sat with it for a while, the professional part of him, the part that had spent 11 months keeping the discipline alive through circumstance that could have buried it, ran through the evaluation. Cleanly, scope was appropriate. Deliverables were specific. The timeline was tight, but not unreasonable for someone who worked at his pace. The rate she was offering was more than fair. It was in fact the rate he would have quoted before the acquisition, which meant she'd done her homework on market value. The other part of him, the part that had walked across a ballroom 3 days ago and said, "You aren't cold, you're lonely," to a woman he'd never met, was harder to evaluate. He wasn't naive. He knew what complicated looked like. He'd had enough experience with situations that seemed clean from a distance and revealed their full geometry slowly over time in ways you hadn't anticipated. This had geometry he couldn't see yet, but the work was real, and the woman on the other side of it had sat across from him that afternoon and said, "I am lonely," with the steady, unflinching directness of someone paying a debt they'd chosen to pay, not because they had to, but because they'd decided it was owed. He respected that more than he knew how to quantify. He replied to the email with 2 words, "I'm in." Then he pushed back from the table, went to the shelf in his home office, where he kept his technical notebooks, the ones from Pinnacle, the systems diagrams, the architecture maps he'd maintained out of habit long after there was no system left to map, and he pulled out the top one. And for the first time in 11 months, he started working at the table like a man who had something real to work toward. They met twice in the first week formally. Conference room, Claire present for the first meeting, just the 2 of them, and the technical documents for the second. Marcus came prepared, thorough, specific, asking exactly the right questions in the order of a man who had already done his reading and was now filling in the gaps. Isabella noticed his precision. The way you notice something that matches a frequency you'd stopped expecting to hear. She had worked with a lot of people. Good ones, smart ones, people who were impressive in the ways that made other people's assistants talk about them in hallways. Marcus was something different, not flashier, not louder. He was the kind of person whose intelligence organized itself in the direction of solving the actual problem, without the performance layer that most people installed on top. He didn't try to impress her. He just worked. She found that, and she analyzed this carefully sitting at her desk on Thursday evening after their second meeting, because she had learned long ago to look directly at the things she was feeling before they became something she hadn't chosen. She found it enormously, almost disorienting attractive. Not romantically. Not yet. She was not someone who allowed not yet to become yes without extensive deliberation. But in the way that competence and integrity in combination created something in her that was perilously close to trust. She had not trusted someone quickly in 5 years. She reminded herself of that on Thursday evening firmly before she shut her laptop and went home. She thought about it again on Friday morning when Marcus sent a preliminary findings document at 6:45 a.m., thorough, precise, and accompanied by a note that said simply, "Found 3 things your team missed. Details in the doc. Call me if you want to go through them before Monday." She called him at 7. He picked up on the second ring. "You're up early," he said, and there was something in his voice, not flirtation, just the ease of a man who was not adjusting himself for her, that made her close her eyes for exactly 1 second. "I'm always up early," she said. "Walk me through the findings." He walked her through them. By the time they hung up 40 minutes later, she had filled 2 pages of her legal pad, identified a structural problem in the integration that her internal team had been papering over for 2 quarters, and was sitting with her phone in her hand, and the specific inconvenient awareness that she had just spent the most enjoyable 40 minutes of her professional week talking to a man who had been making $8 an hour serving her champagne 5 days ago. She sat with that for a moment. Then she wrote the 3rd finding on her legal pad and circled it twice, and she went back to work. Because that was what she knew how to do. That was what she had always known how to do. But the circle was there. And she didn't erase it. 3 weeks into the contract, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive with a moment she could identify clearly in retrospect as, "That's when it changed." It arrived the way most real things arrive, gradually, and then suddenly the way light changes in a room when the sun moves, and you don't notice until the room is different. They started talking after the work was done. It began practically. He'd finish walking her through a technical issue, and instead of hanging up, she'd ask a question that wasn't about the project, and he'd answer it, and she'd answer the answer, and 40 minutes would pass in a way that 40 minutes in her life had not passed in a very long time. Without a deliverable at the end of it. Without a purpose beyond the conversation itself. She asked him once about Detroit. What it was like growing up there. He talked for 20 minutes about his father, a man who had worked 30 years in the auto industry, and who had, Marcus said, never once complained about the work in front of his children. Not because the work was easy, but because complaining in his father's framework was something you did when you still had energy left over that wasn't going toward fixing the problem. He used to say, Marcus said, if you got time to grieve it, you got time to change it. And do you believe that? A pause. I believe it more than I used to. Before the acquisition, I thought it was just my dad being stoic. After, he was quiet for a moment. After I understood it was actually something he'd earned. It's easy to say, don't grieve it when nothing's gone wrong. It's a different thing when you say it after. Isabella was quiet. What about your parents? Marcus asked. She didn't answer questions about her parents. It was a rule she had maintained consistently across every context, professional, social, the rare personal conversation she allowed herself. Her parents were her parents, and they lived in the file labeled before, and she did not open that file in rooms where people could see what was in it. She opened it. She told him about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs and still found time to drill her on math at the kitchen table every night, and who had died of a stroke at 57, 4 months before Isabella closed her first major deal. She told him about her father, who had remarried and moved to Phoenix, and whom she spoke to on birthdays and Christmas, with the careful friendliness of two people maintaining a relationship that had never quite recovered from a grief they'd processed separately. She told him things she hadn't said out loud in years. He listened the way, and she thought this carefully after he listened, the way someone listens when they're not waiting for their turn to talk. When they're actually receiving what you're giving them. When she stopped talking, she realized she was sitting cross-legged on her living room floor, which she did not remember doing. She was almost never on the floor. She had furniture for a reason. "You've been carrying that by yourself for a long time," Marcus said. "I'm accustomed to it." "I know you are." A pause. "That doesn't mean it doesn't weigh something." Isabella pressed her back against the base of the couch and stared at the ceiling. "No," she said quietly. "It doesn't." Outside her window, the city moved in its permanent, indifferent machinery. She listened to it and thought about walls, about what they kept out and what they kept in, and whether there was a point at which the structure that was supposed to protect you became the thing that was slowly, quietly costing you everything you'd built it to protect. She didn't say any of that. But she thought it, and Marcus, 4 miles across the city, sitting at his kitchen table, with his phone pressed to his ear in the dark, was quiet in the particular way of a man who had said what needed to be said and was now giving it room to land. He understood better than she knew the weight of what she was carrying. He'd been carrying a version of it himself, and somewhere in the mathematics of two lonely people, talking in the dark across a city that never went quiet, something was adding up to a number that neither of them had accounted for yet. The contract was supposed to last 6 weeks. It lasted 6 weeks and 4 days before Marcus sent the final deliverable, a complete infrastructure redesign document, 230 pages with implementation guidelines, precise enough that a competent team could execute without him. Isabella read the whole thing over a Saturday cover to cover with a legal pad beside her and coffee going cold at her elbow, and when she finished, she sat for a long time doing nothing. It was the best technical work she'd received from any consultant in 4 years. Bar none. Not close. She picked up her phone. "I finished the report," she said when he answered. "And it's exceptional." A pause. Not fishing for more, just receiving it. "Thank you. I want to extend the contract. Isabella." He said her name the way he'd started saying it in the past 2 weeks, not formally, not as a title, just as a name, like she was a person. "You don't need to extend the contract. The work is done. The implementation guidelines are in there. Your team can execute from the dock." "I know they can. I'm not extending it because I need the work covered." She stopped. She was standing at her window again, the way she always ended up when conversations got difficult. Like the city below was a kind of ballast. "I'm extending it because I'm not ready for the reason we talk every day to go away." The silence that followed was different from the pauses Marcus usually took. Those were thinking silences, processing, calibrating. This one was something else. The silence of a man who has just heard something. He wasn't sure he was going to hear, and is deciding what to do with it. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me," he said finally. "I've been working on that." "I know you have." Another pause. "I'll send you revised terms Monday." She exhaled. "Okay, Isabella." "Yeah." "I'm not ready either," he said. "Just so we're clear." She pressed her forehead briefly against the cool glass of the window. "Monday," she said. Monday. The revised contract was a pretext, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so directly, which was its own kind of language. The work continued. There was always more work. Haze. Capital's technology infrastructure had the accumulated problems of a company that had grown by acquisition faster than it had grown by intention, and Marcus continued delivering it with the same precision, and they continued talking, after the work was done longer each time, ranging further each time from the project that had become their excuse. She told him about the Whitmore deal. The real version, not the polished boardroom narrative, but the actual weeks of it. The specific anxiety of a negotiation that had come within 4 hours of collapse. The particular loneliness of being the only person in the room who could not show the anxiety because she was the room. He told her about the months after the acquisition, The ones he hadn't told anyone about fully the morning he'd checked his account and done the math and understood with the precise, terrible clarity of an engineer looking at failed numbers that he had approximately 90 days before the situation became unfixable. The way he had sat with that for an hour and then made a list because making a list was the only tool he trusted when everything else was noise. "What was on the list?" she asked. First thing was, "Don't panic," which I wrote down because I needed to see it external to my own head. Did it work? Long enough to write the second thing, which was, figure out what you can control today. Not tomorrow, not the whole problem, just today. Isabella was quiet. "I do something similar," she said. "I count." "Count what?" "Seconds. When something when something gets past the wall, I count. It gives me somewhere to stand while the feeling passes." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "How high do you usually have to go?" "Depends on the situation." A pause. "Saturday night at the Meridian I got to 12. He didn't say anything immediately. She heard him processing that, understanding what she was telling him, which was that he had gotten past the wall that night in a way that had required management. 12 is high for you," he said. Not a question. 12 is the highest I've been in years, she said. Another pause. Then, "What's your record?" Something loosened in her chest. The absurdity of the question delivered with complete earnestness. "I don't track the record." "I feel like you track the record." "I'm hanging up." "You're not." She wasn't. It was Claire who said it first, which Isabella should have anticipated, because Claire had been with her for 6 years and had the particular diagnostic accuracy of someone who had spent that long in close orbit of a person without ever being granted direct access to the interior. "You're different," Claire said on a Thursday morning, setting the day's briefing on Isabella's desk with the tone of someone who has decided to say the thing. "Different how?" "Lighter." Claire looked at her steadily. "You've been... I don't know how to say this without it being weird. You've been lighter for about 3 weeks. You were in the Hargrove meeting yesterday, and you laughed. Not the professional laugh, the actual one." Isabella looked at her. "I laugh," she said. "Ms. Hayes, I have worked for you for 6 years." Claire's voice was careful and warm and absolutely immovable. "You do the professional laugh. It's very good. Most people can't tell the difference." A pause. "Yesterday was different." Isabella held her gaze for a moment. "The Hargrove presentation was genuinely funny," she said. "It was," Claire agreed. "That's sort of the point." She left before Isabella could construct a response, which was probably intentional. Isabella sat at her desk and thought about that for considerably longer than she intended to. The Meridian event hit social media on a Thursday evening 5 weeks after it happened. Marcus was at his kitchen table working through a secondary integration issue when his phone started moving, texts first, then calls, then a notification from an account he barely used that told him a video had been posted that included him. He found it in 4 clicks. 47 seconds filmed on someone's phone from the east side of the ballroom, shaky, slightly dark, but clear enough. Clear enough to see him set down the tray. Clear enough to see him walk. Clear enough to see him stop in front of her, say something, and then the kiss, and then the moment after. 300,000 views. He read the caption, "Black catering server kisses, Untouchable CEO, after billionaires dare, and she pays him." Full story in comments. He put his phone face down on the table. Picked it up again. 1.2 million views now. The number had jumped while he was looking at it. He called Isabella. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd already seen it. "I know," she said. "How long has it been up?" Claire flagged it about an hour ago. "We're at..." He heard her checking, 1.8 million. Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "Okay. I can have my PR team issue a statement. There are tools for managing something like this. I've handled media situations before." "What kind of statement?" A pause. That's what I'm trying to decide. What are the options? She listed them in the brisk, organized way. She listed things when she was managing 3 options each with its logic. The denial-adjacent option. No comment. Let it cycle through the news system. Wait for the next story to replace it. The partial disclosure option. Acknowledge the event frame. It as a spontaneous charitable gesture, provide no further detail. The full transparency option, let the story be what it was, provide context, control the narrative by owning it. What does your instinct say? Marcus asked. My instinct says control the narrative. And what does the rest of you say? She was quiet for a moment. A thinking silence, not a defensive one. The sound of a woman actually consulting the rest of herself, which he'd noticed she was doing more often lately. The rest of me says I'm tired of managing how I appear to people, she said. I've been doing it for 5 years and I'm tired of it. Then don't. Marcus, I have a board. I have investors. I know what you have. I'm not saying be reckless. I'm saying there's a version of this where you don't contort yourself to protect an image that you told me 3 weeks ago. You're tired of living inside. The silence that followed was longer. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm saying. Another pause. Then her voice shifted slightly. Less boardroom, more the voice she used after the work was done. How are you with it, the video? I'm fine with it. It has your face. It has my face doing something I'm not ashamed of, he said. I can live with that. He heard her exhale. Not quite a laugh, something smaller. A release. I can't decide if you're the most uncomplicated person I've ever met, or the most complicated. I'm a systems engineer, he said. We're only complicated when the problem requires it. This time she did laugh. The real one, apparently. The video hit 4 million views by morning. Isabella's PR team was in the office by 8. She sat at the head of the table, listened to the options as presented by a woman who had managed media crises for 4 Fortune 500 companies, and then said, I want to put out a statement. My name only. I'll write it myself. The PR director blinked. Ms. Hayes, in situations like this, it's generally advisable to let the communications team. I'll write it myself, Isabella said. I'll send it to you for review before it goes out. But the words are mine. Boom. She wrote it in 40 minutes between 8:45 and 9:25, sitting at her desk with the door closed. She didn't do multiple drafts. She wrote it the way Marcus had told her he wrote his lists, not toward what she wanted people to think, but toward what was actually true. The event at the Meridian on the 15th was not a publicity moment. A man I did not know acted with more integrity and courage than anyone else in a room of 500 people in a moment when it would have been easy and safe to do nothing. I paid what was promised because I honor commitments. I would do it again. His name is Marcus Johnson, and if you're looking for someone to admire from that evening, he's the right choice. The PR director read it and looked at her with an expression that moved through professional concern and arrived somewhere near respect. This is going to generate follow-up, she said. I know. A lot of it. I know that too. Are you sure? Isabella thought about a man who had walked across a silent room and said, I'm not doing this for him. She thought about a woman who had been counting seconds for 5 years as a substitute for feeling things. She thought about 12. Send it, she said. Marcus read the statement on his phone standing in his kitchen and was very still for a long moment. Then he called her. You didn't have to do that, he said when she answered. I know. It's going to make things more complicated. Marcus. Her voice was steady. I've been making things less complicated for 5 years. I've been very good at it. I don't think it's working. He didn't have an answer for that, so he didn't manufacture one. He just stood in his kitchen in the quiet of a Tuesday morning and let her words sit. I appreciated it, he said finally, for what that's worth. It's worth something, she said. That's why I did it. Victor Langford called Isabella's office at 11 a.m. on the day the statement went out. Claire relayed the message with the expressionless precision of a woman who had been waiting for this particular call and had opinions about it. He wants a conversation, Claire said. His words were a private conversation before this gets further out of hand. Isabella didn't look up from her screen. Tell Mr. Langford that I don't have availability this week. He said it was urgent. It probably is, for him. She turned a page. He can email my legal team if there's a substantive matter he wants to address. Claire allowed herself a very small smile on her way out the door. Langford did not email the legal team. What he did over the following 72 hours was considerably less sophisticated. A series of comments through social proxies, people who appeared organically in the comments of news articles about the story, but whose relationship to Langford's circle, Claire identified within a day. The comments followed a pattern questions about Marcus's motives, speculation about his financial situation, the particular insinuating language of people trying to construct a narrative without appearing to construct one. Isabella saw it on a Thursday morning, read through 3 of the comment threads, then called her legal team. I want documentation of the origin pattern, she said. Dates accounts the connection map to Langford. I'm not going to use it today. I'm going to have it. She understood leverage. She had built a career on it. And she understood that the most effective leverage was leverage. You didn't have to use the kind that simply existed visible enough to the right person doing its work silently. She sent Marcus a text. I'm aware of what Langford is doing. It's being handled. Are you okay? His reply came 3 minutes later. I'm fine. Don't let him make this about him, she typed back. He already made it about him. I'm just making sure he regrets it. A pause. Then, you're kind of terrifying, you know that. She put her phone down and went back to work with something that felt unexpectedly like warmth. The follow-up media cycle was substantial, and then as media cycles do it subsided. What didn't subside was the quality of the attention that the statement had generated for Marcus specifically. His LinkedIn had gone from 40 connections, requesting him to 400. 2 separate technology firms reached out through his email. A journalist from a trade publication asked for a comment on the Pinnacle acquisition story, framing it as a systemic piece on how corporate acquisitions affected senior technical talent. He called Isabella about the journalist. Should I talk to her? What's the angle? Systemic piece, she said. How acquisitions gut technical leadership. She knows about Pinnacle. She probably knows about Hayes Capital. She definitely knows about Hayes Capital. Isabella's voice was even. She's probably hoping you'll say something critical. Would that be inaccurate? A pause. No, it would be accurate. The acquisition had consequences that I didn't fully account for at the time. She said it the same way she'd said it in her office the first day, directly without softening it. You can say that. You can say whatever is true. I'm not asking you to protect me. I know you're not. He thought for a moment. I'm going to tell her what it was like, just that, what it was actually like. That's the right call. Even if it reflects badly, Marcus. Her voice was quiet. The truth reflecting badly on me is not a reason for you to be less than honest. I made decisions that had consequences. You lived the consequence. If a journalist is writing a piece that might help the next 412 people have a softer landing than you did, she stopped. Then you should talk to her. He was quiet for a moment. You've changed, he said. I'm changing, she corrected. Present tense, I'm not done. No, he agreed. You're not. He met her for coffee on a Saturday morning, which was the first time they'd met outside the office, or a phone call. He'd suggested it with the casual ease of someone who had decided at some unmarked point in the preceding weeks that the careful professional distance they'd been maintaining was a fiction they were both too intelligent to keep performing. She arrived 2 minutes before he did, which was unusual for her. She was generally exactly on time, which in her world meant early, and she was sitting at a table near the window with her hands around a coffee cup when he walked in. He stopped at the counter, ordered, came to the table, and sat down across from her. You're early, he said. I was in the neighborhood. You live in the opposite direction. She looked at him over her cup. I was in the neighborhood of where I wanted to be. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression. Something warm and specific and careful. The look of a man who is moving towards something and is aware of the weight of each step. "Okay," he said. They talked for 2 hours. Not about work. Not about the media cycle or Langford or the statement or the contract. They talked about his father's hands, which Marcus said were the same shape as his own, and which he'd only understood were something to be proud of when he got old enough to recognize what those hands had built. They talked about the moment Isabella's mother had stopped in the middle of a Tuesday night math drill and looked at her daughter and said, "You know you're going to do something nobody's ever seen before, right?" And how Isabella had carried that sentence through 23 years of rooms that had underestimated her and had never once told anyone her mother had said it. "Why not?" Marcus asked. "Because it was mine," she said. "Some things you keep." He nodded. "I have a few of those." "What's one of them?" he considered. "My father used to say that the most important decision a man makes every morning is whether he's going to let the world define him or define himself inside it. He said it so often it stopped feeling like wisdom and just felt like furniture. And then the acquisition happened, and I was sitting at this kitchen table trying to figure out who I was without the job title, and I heard it again, clear as the first time." Isabella was quiet. "And what did you decide?" "That I was going to define myself." He looked at her directly. "Even if it took longer than I thought, even if the table I was sitting at was the same table I was going to be sitting at for a while." She held his gaze. "I think that's the bravest thing," she said quietly. "That specific choice. I think most people don't make it consciously. They let it happen to them." "Did you make it consciously?" She thought about the shower, the one cry, the decision that had come after it. "I thought I did," she said. "I think I made a version of it that was half brave and half armor, and I've been wearing the armor for so long I forgot which half was which." The coffee shop moved around them. Orders called chairs scraped the background static of a city going about its Saturday, and neither of them moved. "You know what I think," Marcus said. "Tell me. I think you made a brave decision under impossible conditions with the tools you had, and I think you've been punishing yourself for the imperfection of it ever since." He paused. "That's not bravery. That's just a different kind of wall." She looked at him. "Bekimi." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at him the way she had looked at him across a ballroom 5 weeks ago, running the security check, looking for the angle, finding nothing except a man who was saying the thing he believed to be true, without cruelty and without agenda. "You do that," she said. "Do what?" "See straight through to the thing." Her voice was quiet. "Most people stay on the surface. You go directly to the center." "I'm an engineer," he said. "I want to know how the system actually works." "And what's your assessment?" She asked it lightly, but he heard underneath it the real question, the one that cost something to ask. "What do you see when you look at me?" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I see someone who is significantly more than what she's allowed herself to be," he said. "And I see her figuring that out in real time. Which is..." He paused, and the pause had weight. "One of the most remarkable things I've watched happen." Isabella Hayes, who had not cried in front of another person in 5 years, felt the back of her throat tighten. She managed it. Counted to 4, which was the fastest she'd cleared it in recent memory. "That's a generous read," she said. "It's an accurate one." He looked at her steadily. "I don't do generous for its own sake. You know that by now." "I do," she said. "That's why it..." She stopped. "I know," he said. And somehow improbably that was enough. They sat in the Saturday noise of a city that had no idea what was accumulating between two people at a window table, and they finished their coffee. And nobody said the obvious thing, and the obvious thing grew larger and more real, with every minute they didn't say it. Which was its own kind of language. And both of them, for the first time in a very long time, were fluent in it. The Saturday coffee became a Sunday call, became a Tuesday dinner that neither of them named as a dinner until Marcus held the door open at a restaurant that was not a conference room, and Isabella walked through it, and they both understood without saying it that they had crossed a line they had been approaching for weeks. They sat across from each other at a table that had candles on it, which Marcus had not specifically requested, and which he chose not to comment on, and they ordered food that they would later not fully remember eating, because the conversation was doing what their conversations had been doing for weeks, pulling them somewhere deeper than either of them had planned to go. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Isabella said, not as a game, as the next logical step in a progression they were both aware of. Marcus turned his water glass once. "I almost didn't come back from the first year after the acquisition," he said. I don't mean that dramatically. I mean I almost stopped trying. There was a period of about 3 weeks around month 8 where I did the minimum. Woke up, did what needed doing, went back to sleep. Stopped making the lists. Stopped telling myself it was temporary." He paused. "I was just absent. From my own life." "What pulled you back?" "My father called on a Thursday night. Didn't know anything was wrong. I hadn't told him. Just called because it was Thursday, and he called every other Thursday, and he asked me what I was working on." Marcus looked at the table. "I didn't have an answer. I'd been asked that question my whole life, and I always had an answer. And when I opened my mouth, and nothing came out, that scared me more than anything that had happened in the previous 8 months." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was in between things." He looked up, and he was quiet for a second, and then he said, "Marcus, being in between things is just called being alive. What are you going to do next? Not what happened, not how you feel. What are you going to do next?" Marcus shook his head slightly. "I made a list that night." Isabella was watching him with the full, unguarded attention she usually kept rationed. "Your father sounds like someone worth knowing," she said. "He is. He lives in Detroit, retired now." He paused. He saw the video. Something shifted in her expression. "What did he say?" Marcus smiled, the real one, the one that started slow and didn't perform anything. He said, "Son, I raised you to be brave, not reckless, but I'll allow it." Isabella laughed. The actual laugh, the one Claire had identified with diagnostic precision, the one that came from somewhere below the professional architecture. "I'd like to meet him," she said. And then she heard herself and added more carefully, "someday." Marcus looked at her directly. "He'd like to meet you too. I've mentioned you." The admission sat between them, simple and undefended. He had mentioned her to his father. He had talked about her to the person in his life whose opinion he trusted most. Isabella understood exactly what that meant. She picked up her glass and took a slow drink, not because she was thirsty, but because she needed a second to contain the thing that had just moved through her chest. "What did you say?" she asked. "I said I met someone who reminded me that most people are more than their armor." He held her gaze. "And that some armor is worth being patient with." The candle on the table moved in some imperceptible current, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the restaurant went about its business, around two people sitting very still at the center of something they had been moving toward since a man set down a champagne tray and walked across a ballroom. "Marcus," Isabella said. "Yeah, I'm scared." She said it the way she'd been learning to say hard things directly, without softening it to the point of unrecognizability. "I don't do this well. I have evidence of that." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to do it perfectly." "What are you asking?" He thought for a moment. "I'm asking you to stay in the room when it gets difficult, that's all. I'm not asking you not to be scared. I'm not asking you to take the wall down all at once. I'm just asking you not to leave." She held his gaze across the table. "I can do that," she said. "I know you can," he said. "That's why I asked for it and not something harder." What came next was not a montage. It was not smooth. It was two people with significant damage trying to build something real, which meant it was irregular and occasionally difficult, and punctuated by moments where one or both of them pulled back and then had to decide whether to say so. Isabella pulled back first, 10 days after the dinner. She had a board presentation. Hargrove merger, the largest deal Hayes Capital had in motion, the one that would define the next chapter of the company's growth. She went into the preparation the way she went into every major event. She sealed the interior, sharpened the exterior, and redirected everything that wasn't directly useful toward the work. It was how she had always operated. It was what made her exceptional at what she did. She canceled 2 calls with Marcus without explanation beyond "I need to focus on the Hargrove prep." He texted back, "Understood. Let me know when you're through it." No pressure, no wound in the language, just room. She read it 3 times. The board presentation was on a Wednesday. She was in the room for 6 hours, and she was, as she always was in that room, precise and prepared, and in complete command of the space. Hargrove approved. The room erupted in the contained professional way of people who understood the magnitude, but were too experienced to show the full weight of their reaction. She was back at her desk by 4:30. She picked up her phone and called Marcus before she called Claire. "It went," she said when he answered. "How'd it go?" "It went the way it was supposed to go. Hargrove approved." She paused. "I wanted to tell you first." A beat of silence. Just long enough for both of them to understand the geography of what she'd just said. First. Before Claire. Before the board chair. Before anyone else. "Congratulations, Isabella," he said. And the way he said her name, not the title, not the CEO, just the name, made her close her eyes for 1 second. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me the room." "Always," he said. "Simple, no performance in it." She sat at her desk in the quiet of a Wednesday afternoon and felt something she identified after a moment as safety. It was unfamiliar enough that she had to sit with it to name it correctly. Not comfort. She was comfortable. She had built comfort. Not confidence. She had that too abundantly. Safety. The feeling of being with someone who was not going to use the space she gave them against her. She hadn't had that in 5 years. She hadn't known how much she'd missed it until just now. Victor Langford made his move on a Thursday, which was either poor timing or very precise timing, depending on how much credit you were willing to give him. It arrived through the board, not directly, but through Robert Chen, a board member who had been with Hayes Capital since its founding, and who had the particular brand of institutional caution that made him valuable in stable periods and difficult in dynamic ones. He requested a meeting with Isabella. His assistant described it as a routine check-in. Claire, who had developed a finely calibrated antenna for anything that smelled like coordinated pressure, flagged it immediately. "He spoke with Langford last week," Claire said, setting the meeting request on Isabella's desk. "Golf. I can't document the conversation obviously, but the timing is..." "Noted," Isabella said. "Schedule it, tomorrow morning." Chen came in with the careful air of a man delivering news he wished someone else had to deliver. He sat down, declined coffee, and spent 4 minutes discussing the Hargrove approval, in terms warm enough that Isabella understood the compliment was structural context setting for what came next. "There's been some concern," he said finally, "among a few members, about the visibility of recent months." "Which visibility specifically?" He shifted. "The Meridian situation, the statement you issued, the media attention that followed, and now, and I want to be careful how I say this, Isabella, the personal relationship with the consultant." "The consultant is doing exceptional work," Isabella said. Her voice was level. "The Hargrove infrastructure integration, which was a significant risk factor going into yesterday's approval, has been managed at a standard that my internal team couldn't match. That's documented. The work isn't the concern." "Then what's the concern, Robert?" He met her gaze. He had the grace at least to hold it. "The optics. Of the origin of the relationship. Of the public nature of it. Some members feel that the CEO of Hayes Capital should be what?" He paused. More circumspect. Isabella was quiet for a moment. She looked at Chen with the specific focused attention of someone who is deciding exactly where to apply pressure and how much. "Let me be precise," she said. "My personal life has not affected the performance of this company by a single measurable metric. Q3 returns are up 11%. The Hargrove approval was unanimous. The Meridian statement generated positive press coverage in every publication that matters to our investor base. If someone on this board has a substantive operational concern, I'd like to hear it specifically." She paused. If the concern is that I'm in a relationship with a black man that started under unusual circumstances and that I was transparent about publicly, I'd like that said out loud, so we're all clear on what we're actually discussing. Chen's jaw tightened slightly. That's not. Then what is it, Robert, specifically? Silence. I thought so, she said. Tell whoever is asking to bring me a performance metric, a real one. I'll address it directly. Until then, my personal life is mine. She stood. The meeting was over. She called Marcus from the car, still running on the particular adrenaline of a confrontation that had gone the direction she intended. Langford went to the board, she said when he answered. A pause. Through Chen. Yes, how did you? Because it's what I would do if I were him, and running out of direct leverage, Marcus said. His voice was calm. Not unconcerned, she'd learned the difference. Calm the way an engineer is calm when a system is failing, and the calmness is what allows accurate diagnosis. What did they actually say? She told him. Verbatim. She'd committed it to memory before Chen finished speaking, old habit useful now. Marcus was quiet through the whole thing. And you said, he asked when she finished. She told him that too. Another pause. Then, you said that. Yes. To your board member. Yes, Marcus. You said, let's all be clear on what we're actually discussing. I did. She heard him exhale, not relief exactly, but something adjacent. Isabella. What? That was. He stopped, started again. I need you to know that I understand what that cost, in that room, and I don't take it lightly. She felt the back of her throat do the thing it had been doing more frequently in recent weeks, the tightening that preceded emotion she hadn't fully budgeted for. It didn't cost as much as you might think, she said. That's the part that surprised me. What do you mean? I mean, I've been making decisions in that boardroom for 5 years, based partly on what those men would think of me. And I walked in today and said the true thing. She paused, watching the city go past the window, and the wall didn't fall down. I didn't become less. I was exactly who I am. Maybe more. Marcus was quiet. That's what I was trying to tell you, he said finally. That night at the restaurant, about defining yourself inside the world instead of letting the world do it. I know, she said. I heard you then. I understand it now. There's a difference. Yeah, he said softly. There is. Langford's response came 8 days later, and it was cruder than Isabella expected from a man who generally preferred the lever to the hammer. He gave an interview, not to a major outlet, to a financial commentary podcast, with a niche, but influential listenership, the kind of platform that operated below the threshold of general media, but above the threshold of industry gossip. He framed it as a general conversation about corporate governance and leadership standards, and he spent 4 minutes being indirect about it, before saying with the conversational ease of a man who had rehearsed the casual that he had concerns about whether certain CEOs were allowing personal entanglements to cloud professional judgment. He didn't name anyone. He didn't have to. The clip was 47 seconds, and it was on Marcus's phone by 9 a.m., forwarded by 3 different people, from 3 different parts of his professional network, which was itself a data point. He listened to it once, set his phone down, made coffee, listened to it a second time. Then he called Isabella. I saw it, she said before he could speak. I figured. What's your instinct? My instinct is to call my legal team and document every contact between Langford and Chen over the past 60 days, and ensure that if this continues, I have a response that ends it. Her voice was brisk, operational. This was Isabella in motion, not rattled repositioning. My instinct is also to not let it make decisions for me. What does that mean practically? It means... She stopped. He heard her deciding something. It means I'm not going to pull back from this because Victor Langford is uncomfortable with it. That's what he's trying to make happen. He's trying to create enough pressure that managing him becomes easier than managing the relationship. The word relationship landed between them with a weight that neither of them immediately addressed. He's not wrong that it's complicated, Marcus said carefully. No, he's not wrong about that. A pause. He is wrong that complicated means wrong. Marcus turned his coffee cup once on the table. I don't want to be something that costs you things you've built, he said. I want you to know that, if there's a real price. Marcus. Her voice cut in not unkindly but firmly. Don't do that. Don't do what? Don't give me an exit you're building to protect me. I know what that is. I've used that construction before on myself to make preemptive retreats feel like nobility. She paused. I'm not going anywhere because Victor Langford gave a podcast interview. Silence. Okay, he said. Okay, she agreed. He's still going to keep pushing, Marcus said. Men like that, it's not about you specifically. It's about the fact that something happened that he didn't control and that made him look small. He won't let it go. I know. Her voice was steady. But I've been letting men like that shape the perimeter of my life for a long time. I'm done with the geometry of other people's discomfort. Marcus sat with that for a moment. You have gotten significantly more terrifying, he said. I've been studying under a man who walks across silent ballrooms, she said. It's a natural progression. The crisis arrived not from Langford, but from inside the system, which was where real crises always arrived in Marcus's experience, not from the place you were watching, but from the place you'd assumed was stable. It was a Thursday, 7 weeks after the dinner with the candles, and Marcus was at his kitchen table at 11 p.m., working through the final phase of the Hargrove integration when his phone rang. Hayes' Capital office number. Not Claire, a number he recognized as the direct line from the technical operations floor. Mr. Johnson. The voice was young and tightly controlled. I'm Nathan Cole, ops lead on the Hargrove integration. We have a situation. Talk to me. The authentication bridge between the Hargrove system and our existing infrastructure failed about 40 minutes ago. It's affecting. He heard the kid pulling up data. 4 interconnected systems. The API gateway is throwing errors across the board. We've been trying to isolate it for half an hour, and we can't find the root. Marcus was already moving to his second monitor. Did you check the token refresh cycle on the secondary auth layer? A pause. The I'm sorry, which layer specifically? Section 14 of the implementation doc. The secondary authentication bridge has a token refresh parameter that defaults to a setting that works in isolated testing and fails under production load. It's a known issue with this architecture. I flagged it in the preliminary report. He was pulling up his own documentation, now cross-referencing. Did your team implement the custom refresh interval I specified? Another pause. Longer. I'm not seeing that in the implementation notes our team was working from. Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Okay, he said. It's fixable. It's going to take about 3 hours, and I'm going to need direct access to the system. Who's your authorization chain tonight? Ms. Hayes is. I already called her. She said to call you. She's... Marcus heard a door open in the background. She just walked in. He heard her voice before Nathan handed over the phone, giving instructions in the clipped, efficient shorthand of someone who understood what was at stake and was already managing it. Marcus, she said when she got on. I'm coming in, he said. Give me 20 minutes. Nathan's team implemented from an incomplete document. It's not their fault. It's a documentation failure in the handoff. The fix requires someone who knows the architecture end to end. He was already closing his laptop to pack it. 20 minutes. I'll have access credentials waiting, she said. And then quietly, just for him, thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. Ask me again at 2 a.m. He got there in 18 minutes. The operations floor at 11:30 p.m. had the specific energy of a room where professional people were experiencing the controlled panic of a problem they couldn't solve, focused, tense, moving with purpose that hadn't yet found its target. Isabella was at the center of it, which surprised him, even though it shouldn't have. Of course she was at the center of it. She was standing at Nathan's workstation, and she had her jacket off, and her sleeves rolled up, and she was reading code output on the screen. with the focused attention of someone who understood enough to know what she was looking at and was determined to understand more. She looked up when he walked in. Something moved through her face. Relief. Yes, but also something warmer and more specific than relief. The look of someone who has been alone at the center of a problem and has just heard the right footstep in the hallway. "Walk me through what you have," he said. She walked him through it. Clear, sequential, no unnecessary language. He asked 4 questions. She answered 3 of them before he finished asking. He nodded. "Okay." He pulled up a chair at the adjacent station, opened his laptop, and got to work. The room organized itself around him, the way rooms organize around someone who knows what they're doing. The specific, quiet deference of people who are smart enough to recognize competence and step back from it. Nathan hovered close, learning rather than interfering, which Marcus registered and appreciated. Isabella stayed. She didn't hover. She found a position slightly behind and to his left where she could see the screen without crowding the work, and she stayed there. Quiet. Present. She brought him coffee at 12:15 without asking if he wanted it, which he did. At 1 a.m., he isolated the root failure. At 1:40, he had the patch written. At 2:12, he ran the test sequence and watched the systems come back online one by one, like lights returning to a building after a storm. Nathan exhaled loud enough that it was almost a sound of prayer. "That's it," he said. "That's it," Marcus confirmed. "I'm going to send you amended implementation documentation tonight. Make sure your team has it before they touch anything else." "Yes, sir, absolutely." Nathan looked like a man who had narrowly avoided something he would be telling the story of for a long time. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson, genuinely." "Learn the secondary auth architecture," Marcus said, not unkindly. "This one will come back in different configurations if you don't know it all the way down." "Yes, sir." He closed his laptop. The floor was quiet now, the specific quiet of a crisis-resolved people, breathing out, starting to move toward the exits. He looked at his watch. 2:17 a.m. Isabella was still there. She was leaning against the wall near the door with her jacket back on, and her arms crossed, and she was watching him with an expression he'd seen develop over the past weeks, something that had started as the security check look and had incrementally become something else, something that didn't have a wall behind it. 2 a.m., he said. "You can thank me now." She pushed off the wall. "Come on," she said. "I'll drive you home." They sat in the back of the car, in the specific quiet of 2 people who have just moved through something together and are still inside the aftermath of it. The city was almost still at this hour, just the deep infrastructure of it, the things that ran regardless. "You flagged the secondary auth issue in the preliminary report," she said. "Section 14. My team missed it in the implementation. The handoff documentation should have been clearer. That's on me too. Marcus." She turned to look at him. "You drove here at midnight and spent 3 hours fixing a problem that cost this company potentially $100 million partnership. You don't get to also take responsibility for my team's documentation gap. I'm just telling you where the failure point was, so it doesn't happen again." She shook her head, slowly, like a woman who is deciding something rather than dismissing something. "You know what you did tonight. Fixed an authentication bridge. You saved something that took me 8 months to build." Her voice was quiet and direct. "And you drove 18 minutes in the middle of the night, and you sat in that room, and you did it without making anyone feel small, including the kid whose team caused the problem in the first place." She paused. "That's not just skill, Marcus. That's character." He looked at her. Outside, the city moved in its late-night reduced rhythm, and inside the car, there were 2 people sitting close enough that the distance between them had stopped being about geography. "I did it because the work mattered," he said, "and because you mattered." She held his gaze. "I know," she said softly. "That's what I'm telling you. Those 2 things being true at the same time, that's what character is." He looked at her for a long moment. At the woman who had walked into the world he was part of 43 floors above this city, and said, "I am lonely, like a person paying a debt they'd chosen to honor. At the woman who had said, "I'm not going anywhere because Victor Langford gave a podcast interview." At the woman who had been standing in a crisis floor at 2 in the morning with her sleeves rolled up because the problem was hers and she didn't outsource what was hers. "Isabella," he said. "Yeah. I need to say something." "Okay." "I've been careful with this," he said. "With us. Because careful is what the situation called for. Because you needed room, and I understood that, and I meant what I said about being patient with the armor." He paused. "But I think we're past the point where I'm doing you any favors by not saying the obvious thing." She didn't move. She was very still the way she got still when something was reaching her. "Say it," she said. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it. Like something that should have been done a while ago, and both of them had known it. "I'm in love with you," he said. "That's the obvious thing. I've been in love with you for about 6 weeks, and I've been watching you come back to yourself, and it has been—" He looked for the right word, and found it. "It has been the most extraordinary thing I've ever had a front row seat to." The car was very quiet. Isabella looked down at his hand holding hers, then up at him. She did not count seconds. She did not build a wall. She did not reach for the professional composure that had kept her standing in rooms that were designed to make her feel small. She just stayed in the room like she'd promised. "I know," she said. And her voice had something in it that she hadn't let herself use in 5 years, something open and unguarded, and terrifyingly perfectly real. "I've been in love with you since the coffee shop. Maybe before." Marcus squeezed her hand once. She turned hers over and held on. Outside Manhattan ran. Its permanent machinery, indifferent as always, to the small enormous things happening in its back seats and kitchen tables and 43rd floor offices. But inside the car, something that had been broken in 2 separate people was doing the slow, effortful, worthwhile work of becoming something new. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the drive. They didn't need to. What had needed saying had been said. And what came next was not an ending.
Then,
It was the first night of something that was going to require all of them, all of the courage, all of the honesty, all of the hard-won wisdom of 2 people who had been to the bottom of things and climbed back and were now finally willing to try the one thing they'd both been afraid to try. Each other. 3 weeks after the car ride, Marcus launched his consulting firm. He told Isabella about it on a Tuesday morning. The way he told her most things now, directly without softening the edges or pre-managing her reaction. He called her at 7:30, which had become, without either of them formally deciding it, the time that belonged to them before the day took over. "I filed the paperwork yesterday," he said. "Johnson Infrastructure Solutions, LLC, registered in New York." She was quiet for exactly 1 second. "What changed?" "You asked me that like something changed suddenly." "Did it?" He thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about everything that mattered. "No," he said. "It accumulated. Every piece of work I did for you, every system I fixed, every document I wrote, I kept thinking this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Not for a company that owns me. For myself." A pause. "And I had enough saved finally. Enough cushion to do it right. Which—" He stopped. "Which is partly the $1 million, she said. "Which is partly the $1 million, he confirmed. He'd thought about whether to say it directly or let it pass unaddressed, and he'd decided that with Isabella, the direct path was always the right one. "I want you to know that I know that, and I want you to know it doesn't diminish what I built with it. I used it the way I'd have used any capital, as a foundation, not a destination." "I know that," she said. "I've watched you work, Marcus. Nobody does what you do with someone else's money. That came from you." "Some of it came from you," he said. "The contract, the access, the willingness to trust the work before you had evidence." He paused. "I don't forget that." "You don't owe me anything for that." "I know I don't. That's not what I'm saying." His voice was steady. I'm saying that what you did offering the contract when you didn't have to, after everything the acquisition was, that wasn't nothing. And part of building something real is knowing what it was built from. A pause. I wanted you to be the first person I told, after my father. She pressed her lips together. How'd he react? He said, "Son, it took you long enough." And then he cried a little, which he'll deny. Marcus's voice had the warmth in it that it always had when he talked about his father. How are you reacting? She stopped, started again. I'm proud of you, which I wasn't expecting to feel as strongly as I do. She paused. This is irrational. Say it anyway. I'm going to miss being your client. She said it quietly. I know the contract was always going to end. I know this is better. It was a good excuse to need you around. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, Isabella, you don't need an excuse anymore. She exhaled. The particular exhale of a woman who has heard something true and is learning still not to argue with it. I know, she said. I'm working on believing it. I know you are. A pause. That's all I'm asking. Johnson Infrastructure Solutions signed its first independent client 2 weeks after filing a mid-sized fintech company, whose CTO had been in Marcus's professional network since Pinnacle, and had been waiting, he said, for Marcus to hang his own shingle for 18 months. The rate Marcus quoted was the rate of a man who understood his own value precisely, and had stopped discounting it for the comfort of rooms that should have been paying full price all along. The CTO accepted without negotiating. Marcus sat with that for a moment after the call. He sat with the particular complicated feeling of a man whose sense of his own worth has been tested by 18 months of external evidence suggesting the opposite, and who is now receiving confirmation that the internal reading had been correct all along. He made a list, not a survival list, a building list, the kind his father had always made, the kind that starts with what you can control today and ends with what you're building toward. He hadn't made a building list in almost 2 years. He filled 2 pages. Isabella watched the Langford situation resolve itself with the quiet efficiency of a machine that has been correctly calibrated and set in motion. The legal documentation. Claire had assembled Langford's contact with Chen, the podcast interview, the social media proxy campaign, sat in a file that Isabella sent to Langford's personal attorney on a Wednesday morning with a single accompanying note, no action required at this time. File is being maintained for reference. Langford's attorney called her within the hour. She didn't take the call. She had learned in 20 years of business that the most powerful move in most situations was not the next move, but the willingness to make no move and let the other person understand the fullness of what you were capable of without requiring a demonstration. The file was the demonstration. The silence was the message. Langford went quiet. He did not give another interview. He did not contact Chen again. He attended a charity gala 3 weeks later, and when a journalist asked him apparently on a whim about the Meridian incident, he said it was a private matter, and he wished Ms. Hayes well and moved on. Isabella read the transcript and felt nothing about it. Not triumph, she'd long since passed the point where Langford could generate anything in her that required that kind of resolution. Just the clean administrative satisfaction of a problem correctly handled and set aside. She had bigger things to think about. Robert Chen requested a second meeting in November. This time, he came without the careful air of a man delivering difficult news. He came in looking slightly older than he had in September, and considerably more honest. I owe you an apology, he said before he'd fully sat down. Isabella looked at him. Okay. The meeting in September. What I said about optics and circumspection. I was carrying someone else's discomfort into your office and dressing it up as institutional concern, and you called it precisely, and I didn't have the integrity to acknowledge that in the room. He held her gaze. I'm acknowledging it now. She studied him for a moment. Robert Chen was 63 years old and had been on her board since the beginning, and had in that time been reliably decent in the way that reliable decency operates, not heroically, but consistently in the small structural ways that keep institutions functional. This was a departure from form. She respected it proportionally. "I appreciate you saying it," she said. "I also want to say—" He paused, choosing words with the care of a man who has rehearsed this. "What you said in that meeting, about bringing you a performance metric. That was right. The company is performing. You are performing. The rest of it." He shook his head slightly. "Is none of this board's business." "No," she said simply. "It isn't." He nodded. "We agree." He started to stand, then stopped. "For what it's worth, the statement you issued after the Meridian, I thought it was wrong at the time. I thought it was impulsive, unnecessary." He looked at her. "I've changed my mind. I think it was one of the braver things I've seen a CEO in this position do, and I've been in this business a long time." Isabella held his gaze. "Thank you, Robert," she said. After he left, she sat at her desk for a moment, with her hands flat on the surface of it, feeling the solid wood beneath her palms, and she thought about Brave. About what it had cost, and what it had returned, and how the accounting of it looked so different now than it had in the moment when she was sitting in a car pressing her hand to her mouth and asking herself what she had just allowed to happen. She picked up her phone and sent Marcus a text. "Chen apologized today, officially." The reply came in under a minute. "Good man." Then after a pause, "Dinner tonight." She typed back, "I'll cook." A longer pause. "Then you cook." "I'm learning," she wrote. "Don't make it weird." She could feel him laughing from 4 miles away. She could. She was in fact learning to cook. This was Marcus's fault. Partially he cooked with the same focused precision he brought to everything else, and watching him work in a kitchen was the kind of thing that made a person want to try, which Isabella had recognized, and then after a brief internal debate, allowed herself to act on rather than file under impractical. She was not good at it yet. She was good at most things. She'd built a career on the specific combination of intelligence and discipline that compressed learning curves. Cooking was humbling her in ways she found alternately frustrating and quietly clarifying. There was something useful about being a beginner again, about standing in a kitchen at 7 p.m. with her sleeves rolled up, making mistakes that couldn't be solved by leverage or language. Marcus sat at her kitchen counter on those evenings, and did not offer unsolicited advice which she had specifically and explicitly requested. He offered solicited advice when she asked for it in the specific patient way. He explained things, not talking down, not performing the teaching, just answering the question she'd actually asked. "It's too hot," she said one evening, staring at a pan that was doing something she hadn't authorized. "Turn it down." I did turn it down. Turn it down more. That defeats the purpose of. Isabella, turn it down. She turned it down. The situation resolved. She stood looking at the pan with the expression of a woman who has won many rooms and is being periodically and usefully defeated by a skillet. "Don't say anything," she said. "I'm not saying anything." "You're thinking things." "I'm thinking dinner smells good," he said. He was reading something at the counter, legs stretched out entirely at home in her kitchen, in a way that had arrived gradually, and then was simply one day the fact of things. "And that you're doing better than you think." She turned to look at him. He looked up from his reading. "You always do that," she said. "Do what?" "Say the thing that takes the wind out of whatever I'm building up about myself." She turned back to the stove. "It's disarming." "That's generally the goal." She was quiet for a moment. "Marcus?" "Yeah. I'm happy." She said it the way she said hard things directly without softening. But this one wasn't hard. That was the part she was still adjusting to. "I keep waiting for it to feel complicated. And it doesn't." He set his reading down. "Good. I'm not naive about it. I know things get hard. I know we're still learning each other. I know." "Isabella." His voice was gentle and amused and absolutely certain. "You don't have to qualify it. Just let it be true." She looked at the pan. Something in her chest settled. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. Marcus's father came to New York in December. His name was Gerald Johnson, and he was 67 years old, and when he walked through the arrivals gate at LaGuardia, he moved with the particular unhurried dignity of a man who has earned every year he's carrying. Marcus embraced him the way men embrace fathers. They are still learning to fully know with the slight awkwardness of bodies that share a shape but have lived separate lives, and with something underneath the awkwardness that was complete. Isabella met him for dinner on Gerald's second evening in the city. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for things that mattered, not with her professional preparation, which was architectural, but with the newer kind she was developing, which was about being present rather than ready. About bringing herself rather than a version of herself calibrated for the room. Gerald Johnson shook her hand and looked at her with eyes that were Marcus's eyes, in an older face, and he said, "My son talks about you like you hung the moon." Isabella glanced at Marcus. Marcus looked entirely unbothered. "I talk about her accurately," he said. "She just happens to have accomplished things that sound like that." Gerald laughed. A laugh like Marcus's genuine slow-to-arrive worth waiting for. "Sit down," he said, pulling out her chair with the unconscious courtesy of a man who had done it 10,000 times. "Tell me who you are, not what you do, who you are." She sat down. And she told him, not the resume, not the company history. She told him about a kitchen table in Baltimore where her mother had drilled her on math. She told him about the choice she'd made at 29, and what it had cost her, and what it had built. She told him about counting seconds. She told him about a Saturday morning in a coffee shop, where a man had told her that most people were more than their armor. Gerald listened to all of it. He listened the way Marcus listened, receiving, rather than waiting present for the whole thing. When she finished, he looked at his son. "Yeah," he said simply. Like a verdict. Like a man checking his own reading of a situation against new data, and finding the instruments confirmed. Marcus looked at him. "Yeah," he agreed. Isabella looked between them. "What does that mean?" "It means," Gerald said, picking up his menu with the ease of a man in no hurry, "that my son knew what he was doing, which I suspected, but it's good to have evidence." He glanced at her over the top of the menu. "He walked across a room for you. That's not nothing. Marcus doesn't walk across rooms without a reason worth walking for." She held Gerald's gaze. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm aware of what it was." "Good." He went back to the menu. "Now, what's good here?" Marcus says the fish. "The fish is excellent," she said. "Fish it is." The hardest conversation happened on a Sunday in January. Quiet, the city outside moving at its winter pace. Both of them on her couch, in the particular ease of people who have learned each other's silences. Marcus was reading. Isabella had her laptop open but wasn't looking at it. She'd been not looking at it for 20 minutes, which he'd noticed, and not mentioned, waiting for whatever it was to find its way out. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always." She closed the laptop, turned to face him. "The acquisition, pinnacle. If the decision had been made differently, if Hayes Capital had preserved the technical division instead of dissolving it, you wouldn't have been at the Meridian. You wouldn't have been serving champagne. None of this," she gestured between them, "would have happened." He looked at her for a moment. He understood the full geometry of what she was asking, not just the surface question, but the thing underneath it. The guilt she still carried, careful and controlled but present. And the knot in the guilt, which was the fact that what it had cost him had also led him here. "No," he said. "It wouldn't have." "How do you—" She stopped, started again. "How do you hold both of those things?" He set his book down. Thought about it with the seriousness the question deserved. "My father had a word for it," he said. "He called it the whole account. Not just the loss side or the gain side, the whole account. You look at everything the thing cost and everything it returned, and you hold both at the same time, and you decide if the accounting is honest." He paused. "The acquisition cost me 2 years I wouldn't choose to repeat. It cost me professional ground that took real effort to recover. It cost me a version of myself that I was comfortable with and forced me to find out who I was without the scaffolding. He looked at her. And it returned me to a table in a ballroom where I set down a tray and walked across a room. And everything that came from that. Isabella was quiet. "The whole account," she said. "The whole account," he confirmed. "I don't want you to carry guilt about the acquisition in a way that distorts things. What happened was real, and it mattered, and I'm not asking you to erase it. I'm asking you to also count the other side." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm still going to keep working on the severance reform," she said. Hayes Capital had quietly in October revised its acquisition, workforce reduction policies, longer notice periods, expanded severance scales, mandatory redeployment evaluation before elimination. Claire had helped her draft it. She hadn't announced it publicly. She'd simply changed the policy and begun implementing it. That's not guilt. That's accountability. "I know the difference," he said. "So do you." "I'm also going to keep being sorry," she said. Not in a way that makes it about me, but I'm going to carry it appropriately." She held his gaze. "Because those were 412 people, and their names were in a column, and I owe it to them to remember that columns have names." Marcus reached over and took her hand. "That," he said, "is the most important thing you've said to me since the day you walked into your own office and told me the truth." She turned her hand over and held his. They sat in the Sunday quiet and let the weight of it settle into something they could both carry without being crushed by it. That was the thing Isabella was learning, that some weight wasn't meant to be put down. It was meant to be carried correctly. By someone who understood what it was and chose to hold it anyway. Spring arrived, the way New York. Springs arrive suddenly and without apology, the city shaking off winter and reasserting itself in a key that felt almost aggressive after the gray of January and February. Marcus's firm had 4 clients by March, 5 by April. He had hired 1 employee, a former Pinnacle colleague named Diana, who was sharp and reliable, and had sent him a message the week he launched, saying, "I knew you'd do this eventually. I've been waiting." He had turned down 2 clients whose scope he evaluated and found misaligned with the quality of work he intended to produce, which his father said was the sign of a man who understood his own value, and which Diana said was the sign of a man who was going to give her gray hair. He called Isabella on the evening he turned down the second one. "You turned down a contract," she said. "The scope was wrong. The rate wasn't wrong. The scope was wrong," he said again, simply, without apology. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've spent 20 years taking every deal that had the right rate." "I know." "Are you saying I've been doing it wrong?" "I'm saying you built what you built your way, and I'm building what I'm building my way, and maybe between the 2 of us, we have the whole picture." A pause. "Also, yes, occasionally the scope matters more than the rate." She laughed. "The real one. You're going to be insufferable when you're successful." "I'm already successful," he said. Not arrogantly, just as a fact. The fact of a man who has redefined the word for himself and is comfortable with the new definition. "Yes," she said softly. "You are." On an evening in late April, Isabella came home to find Marcus already there. He had a key, which had happened, the way most real things happened, gradually, and then simply as a fact, and something on the stove that smelled like his father's recipe for the red beans and rice he'd described once in detail, and she'd told him she wanted to try. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Howe was at the stove with his back to her, and she watched him for a moment without announcing herself. Watched the way he moved, the same economy of motion he brought to everything. Nothing wasted, everything purposeful. Watched the kitchen, that had been purely functional in her life, become in his presence something that felt lived in. Something that felt like home. She had thought 5 months ago, sitting in a car with her hand pressed to her mouth, that she had been broken in a way that might be permanent. That the wall was not a choice anymore, but a structure she had inhabited for so long it had become the shape of her. That the woman who had stood in a ballroom holding a champagne glass with both hands had simply forgotten how to be anything else. She had been wrong, not about the wall. The wall had been real. Not about the cost had been real too. But she had been wrong about permanent. "You're staring," Marcus said without turning around. "I'm observing," she said. "There's a distinction." "What are you observing?" She set her bag down, walked into the kitchen, stopped beside him at the stove. "That I was wrong about something," she said. He looked at her. "What were you wrong about?" "I told myself for a long time that I was better alone, that the math worked out cleaner, that the cost of letting someone in was always higher than the return." She looked up at him. "I was wrong about the math." He held her gaze. "What's the correct calculation?" "The return," she said, "is incalculable, which is something I've never been comfortable saying before, about anything." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who had spent 5 years building walls, and was now standing in her own kitchen sleeves rolled up, telling him the truth without hedging or qualifying or managing the delivery. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him fully, without the half-second calculation she'd spent years inserting between wanting and allowing. Just leaned, let herself be held. "You know what I think," he said. "Tell me." "I think we both needed the long way around," he said. "I think neither of us would have been ready for this if it had come easier. And I think—" He paused quiet for a moment. "I think the whole account is in the black." She pressed her face briefly against his shoulder. "Yeah," she said. "It is." On a warm Saturday, 6 months after the Meridian Gala, they sat on the terrace of a restaurant she had walked past for 4 years without entering. The city moved below them, indifferent and magnificent, as always doing its permanent work. They'd been talking for 2 hours, not about anything urgent. Just the conversation that had been running for months now, that found new ground every time she thought they'd covered everything. She picked it up her glass, set it down. "Marcus, yeah." That night. She looked at him. The Meridian. If there had been no $1 million, no dare. If it had just been a room and a man who decided to walk across it. She paused. Would you still have done it? He looked at her. Not with the pause of a man calculating an answer, with the stillness of a man for whom the answer is so clear and so long decided that the question almost makes him smile. "I was already walking before he finished the sentence," Marcus said. "The money had nothing to do with it." She held his gaze. She had known sitting in that car 5 months ago, counting to 12. She had known reading his file the next morning. She had known in the coffee shop and the Tuesday dinner and the crisis floor at 2 a.m. and the Sunday in January, when he held her hand and told her about the whole account. She had known it every time and had let herself believe it incrementally, the way a woman who has been broken once lets herself believe things carefully and then all at once. She reached across the table. He took her hand. The city ran its great indifferent machine below them, and at a table above it all, 2 people who had been broken in different ways and rebuilt themselves through stubbornness and dignity and the refusal to stop moving. They sat in the simple, extraordinary fact of each other. Not a performance. Not a negotiation. Not a careful management of access and exposure and risk. Just 2 people present holding on. The woman nobody could reach had been reached, and the man who had crossed the room had never once for a single moment considered turning back.